So we're back with lesson 1, part 3. So we've created a template application using Visual Studio, loaded it up in the browser, kind of explored a little bit about what's here and how it works. So let's make a few customizations. So first thing is maybe let's change the text here on the home page. So where would we go if we want to modify this? What file do we want to open? Okay, thanks Adil. So if we go to our Views, Home, and open up our index file, we can change some of the stuff that's here. I'll change the H1 tag that's on line 6. They are first ASP.NET app. And I can change the text on here as well. We're building apps with ASP.NET Core. So if I save that change, we can just go back to the browser, refresh our home page, and we should get our new content. In fact, notice I didn't even have to hit refresh. As soon as I save and come back, it actually automatically reloads. You'll also notice on our views, and we'll talk more about this, we've got mostly standard HTML, but the syntax, what do you suppose this little highlighted @ symbol, what do you suppose this code on lines 1 to 3 is representing? What's going on up here? Yeah, you got it. The @ symbol represents server-side script. And Visual Studio will automatically highlight it in yellow so it stands out, easy to distinguish from our HTML. Okay, so we've changed the home page. What if we want to, let's say we want to change this link. So it says Monday_first. Let's say I want to change that link. That's kind of like we could replace it with a logo, but let's say we just want this to say first app without a space. What file do you suppose we would go into? Where would we change that? We want this to say first space app instead of Monday first. Yeah, so that's actually up here. It's right, so that's our page title. Shows up here. Yes. So if I wanted that to say, so it says homepage Monday first, right? If I wanted this to say my first app, if I change that on line 2, notice now it reloads and says my first app. So yes, Megan, that's exactly what it does. So how would we change this to say first app? What file would that go under? What file would we need to open and change? Give you a hint, we haven't actually looked at this file yet. So see if you can find it. All right, thanks, Sammy. And where do we find the _layout file? That is the right file. Where does it live? You got it. So under shared, we've got an _layout. So on line 14, we've got our Bootstrap navigation bar, and on line 14, we've got a link that says Monday_1st. So it basically just takes the name of the project and puts it at the top left. So if we want to change that, we can just say, first app. And Visual Studio nicely puts a little green mark here showing I've saved a change to this line. So we know what we've modified. And now when I go back, my nav bar, it now says first app instead of Monday 1st. So nothing, nothing earth-shattering. We're just changing some HTML here. So this shared template includes Bootstrap. It includes our site CSS. We have our collapsible nav bar with our links. Our main page content gets injected here. And as Adil said, this @ symbol, it represents server-side code. So that's where the individual page content will get rendered. And then we've got a footer down at the bottom that, again, we can customize. Let's make another change. We'll leave this file. We'll come back to it in a minute. Let's say, so we've got a default color for our links. So my privacy link shows up in blue. Or on the register page, these links all show up, register login in blue. Let's say I want to change this color. What file would we go to change the default color of our links? Yep. It's in the CSS folder, Adil. Yeah. If we open up under www.root CSS, we open up site.css, I could change the color. I could change this to any other color I want. So if I take out that hex value, I could choose something else for our links. Maybe I want them to be, like this orange color, for example. So I'll choose that instead. It shows me I've got an unsaved change here. I'll save. Now all my links are orange. And that's going to appear, I guess, not in the footer link because that must have a separate class. Well, that's odd. There. I had to clear my cache, so now they're orange. I could change the rollover color if I wanted, but all my links are orange. Okay, so we take what Visual Studio gives us and we can customize it. So the last thing I want to do today is get a little practice with a little more with MVC. Let's add a new page. So we want to create a new page and then add a new link to it. So right now in our nav bar, we've got a link to the index, a link to privacy policy. So we want to make an About Us page. So we're going to have to do 3 things. What are the 3 things we're going to need in order to do this? To create a new page and include a link to this page. What are the 3 steps we're going to have to follow? So how do we create an About Us page? Okay, yep, so that's going to be step 1. Thanks, Megan. We're going to make a new method in the controller called About. Yep. What else do we have to do? Thanks, Adil. We'll have to create a new view file. Yep. And then what's the last thing we're going to do? You got it, Xavier. We're then going to edit the layout and add the link. So let's do these things one at a time. So we'll go back to our controller. So we want to display new view at /home/about. So I'm going to make a new method. Virtually all our controller methods are going to return this iAction result, this kind of generic result class. I'll call my method about. And the code inside the method body, it's going to be exactly the same as the index and privacy. We simply want to return a view. So let's start here. So here's the new code. Make a new method called about. The method returns an iAction result. And the method body is simply returning a view. So add this code to your home controller. I'm going to try it out. Keep my code here so you can see it. So to try this out, I can go to /home/about. One of the other cool things at .NET is that the URLs are not case sensitive in the browser. So it doesn't matter whether I use a capital H or capital A in my browser. It matters in the code, but not in my address bar. So this method gets called, but we get this error. How come? What is the error telling us? Why'd this happen? You got it. It's trying to load a view called about, and it's looked in all these places. The first place it looked was views, home, about. Couldn't find it. Then it tried views, shares, about. No, pages shared about. It doesn't exist. So we're trying to load a view that doesn't exist yet. So the way we fix this is making sure we create a view called about.cshtml and we put it in one of these folders. We're going to put it in the default location, which will be views, home. So we could go to Solution Explorer and create the view through there, but there's actually a bit of a shortcut. So I could go here, right-click Views, Home, and choose Add a View. That would work. But there is a bit of a shortcut, which I'm going to show you. Close some of this stuff up. If I just go to my controller, if I right-click the method name, I can just choose Add View. Now, there's a few options here that come up. There's a razor view or an empty razor view. So razor is just the name for Microsoft's view syntax. So for today, we just want an empty view. So I'm going to pick an empty razor view, click Add, and that just wants me to give it a name. And I'm going to use the exact same name as our method, because the naming convention is if the method name's called about, it's automatically going to load a view called about. And I'm going to leave the .cshtml extension. And I'll click Add. Gives me this blank view. We don't need any server-side code on it, so I'm actually just going to delete everything. And I'll just put on this is our first view. So I'm just putting on some standard HTML here, nothing fancy, just an H1 and a paragraph tag. And you'll notice that Visual Studio was smart enough to put it in the right folder. Because we generated this view from the home controller, it automatically gets placed inside the views and home subfolder, which is where we want it. So again, a lot of stuff happens automatically, but you got to follow the naming conventions. And there will be one other naming convention rule we'll need to look at in just a minute. This should make this error go away now. Notice it automatically now loads again in my browser. Now that I saved the change, I don't even have to refresh it. Just come back to the browser. Oops, I need to save my change here. And it automatically will do a refresh when I save the change. We've got our H1 and our paragraph text. So we've done 2 of the 3 steps now. We created the controller method. We created a view with the same name. And then our third step, as Xavier suggested, is we want to modify our layout file to add an about link here. Okay, so our page works, but the only way to get here is to actually type the URL directly, which is not very helpful. Users aren't even going to know this URL exists. We need to give them a link to click to get here. So I'm going to go back to the layout file, and we see 2 links here. One on line 22, here's our home link. And on line 25, here's the privacy link. Now, if you notice, if you look carefully at line 22 or 25, these look a little different than regular HTML anchor tags that we're used to. What's different about them? Okay, so they've got this ASP area directive, which is actually not even being used. Yes, true. So we're going to kind of ignore that. We don't use that much, but it's here. But what else is kind of different from a regular anchor tag? Right, there's no href attribute. So what do we see instead of an href attribute? Yep, so it tells us instead we've got this ASP controller and ASP action. You got it, and Megan as well. So at runtime, now, so these are server-side directives. These are like server-side properties. You know, this is not standard HTML. This is particular to .NET MVC. If I go here and view the source, notice at runtime, if you notice the links, this one just goes to /. We do see href here at runtime. So we could just write the code like this, just with a regular href tag. But the convention in .NET MVC is to use this structure instead. How come? Both would be correct. Why do you suppose these links are written this way? As ASP control with this ASP controller and ASP action properties instead of the href. They do the same thing ultimately. Why do you suppose Microsoft's using this structure instead in the code view? Yeah, Adil, that's right. It's the idea that we're being very intentional, that our app is using an MVC pattern. So these links, we're not simply calling another URL, but we're invoking a particular method in a particular controller. So this structure of using ASP controller and ASP action, this syntax, is to be very deliberate and intentional that our app is using MVC. So this isn't wrong to just use a regular href, but it's not kind of regular practice when we're working in an MVC architecture. So I'm going to add one more link, and I'm going to continue to follow this pattern. So down here after line 26, I'm going to add a new list item, and I'll use the same Bootstrap nav item class, and then I'm going to add an anchor tag. And again, I'll use the same class as my other links, nav-link and text dark. Now I'm going to ignore the ASP area tag. We don't really need it. We're not going to use it at all in this course, so I'm just going to ignore it. So I'm going to set our controller as home, and our action is going to be about, because we're going to invoke the about method that we just created in the controller. Our link is also just going to say about. Okay, so similar link, very similar to the other two links. I just removed the unnecessary ASP area, and I've changed the action. The action on our first link was index, second link was privacy, and the action on our new link is about. So we're going to invoke the method we just created. Shrink this down. And it reloads, and we can see that our nav bar, now instead of two links, home and privacy, it's also got an about link. So to create a new page is as simple as the process we just did. When we want to add a new page, we're going to create a method in the controller. We're going to create a view with the same name that's returned by that method. And then we're going to add a link somewhere in our application so users have the ability to access that page. I imagine that's pretty straightforward. Any questions about this process so far of the controller method, generating the view, adding the link using ASP controller, ASP action? I know this is a completely different way of building a web application than what we've done before. Everybody with me? I want to do two other small things with this, and then we're going to call it a day. I want to show you the importance of the naming conventions. I'm going to make two small changes in my app. You don't have to do these in your app. I'm going to undo them, but they're for illustration purposes, just to be clear about naming convention and some of Microsoft's rules. One of the important rules when you're working in .NET MVC is casing. You'll notice from words like iActionResult, what do you notice about iActionResult or this response cache location or error view model? What do you notice about the naming convention Microsoft uses? Yes. So does anybody know what this naming format is called? It's similar to Camel Case, but it's slightly different. What is this version called where even the first word is capitalized? So in Camel Case, the entire first word is lowercase, and it's only the subsequent words that start with capitals. Microsoft has used this version for decades. Does anybody know what this is called? It's not Camel Case, it's something else. Megan, good guess. Adil has got it. It's called Pascal Case. And this is the naming convention that Microsoft has used forever and that it wants you to use for MVC. So notice, if I rename my about method and start it with a lowercase, notice I get this little gray highlighting with this dotted border. And Microsoft says here, there's potential fixes. And it says, this is a naming rule violation. So things like method names must begin with uppercase. So it's recommending I change the lowercase a to an uppercase A. So if I click it, it'll rename it. So I know you guys have done a lot of Java, and Tom may have highlighted the use of Pascal Case in your C# course already. But just a reminder that we're going to be using Pascal Case, not for variables, but for method names, class names, etc. In controller names, any of that stuff in .NET MVC, we're going to use Pascal Case. Okay, same with things like property names in our classes and models. The other thing I wanted to show you, so I'm going to keep that, is it possible, or how it's possible, that our method name and the view name could be different? It's not recommended, but is it possible? Yes. So I'm going to change mine for a minute just to show you. Let's say I call my view. You don't have to change yours, but I just want to illustrate. Let's say I call my view about-us. My method is just called about. So now I get the same error we got before. The about method automatically looks for a view called about.cshtml. It is possible to fix this. So any idea how I could get my about method to load the view called about-us? It is possible, but I'd have to make a change here in my return view statement. So what change do you suppose I could make on line 34 that would fix this? Again, I don't recommend doing this, but I want to show you that it's possible. So my method's called about, but my view is called about-us. So how do I get the about method to load the view called about-us? Yep, exactly. So in our return statement, notice this is overloaded. So if I specify the name of the actual view, it will work. Yeah, and it's a string, so it's got to be in quotes. So this isn't really following best practices, and I don't recommend this, but you can do it. So it does load this way. Not ideal. So I'm going to undo that change and rename my file. I'm going to follow the naming conventions, and I recommend you do too. So I'm going to put it back. Save my change. And we're back. So our code gets recompiled. Where does the compiled code live? I'm just going to show you. We don't see it anywhere in Solution Explorer. But if I open my project in Windows, here's my solution file. Here's the web project. We have this folder. We saw all these folders, but here we've got a bin folder. And under debug in .NET 5, here are all the dependency libraries. And down here is the Monday 1st DLL. So this is our compiled binary file where all of the C# code, all the controllers, models, other C# code gets compiled down to ones and zeros. So there's our compiled file. So every time we change the C# and build, it will recompile our DLL. And you may have seen this in your C# class with your Windows desktop apps. Okay, last thing we're going to do. We're going to try a really simple example of passing some data, just a message, from the controller to the view, and then using some server-side code in the view to render it. So we're going to add one more line of code to the controller, one more line of code to the view, and then we're done for the day. So we're going to use the unstructured view bag container to define a variable, populate it, and display in the view. So the view bag, it's not for passing highly structured data like a list of customers. We're going to do that differently. But if we just want to pass a simple message and display it in the view, like maybe we want to check a login attempt, and if it fails, we want to reload the login screen and send a message to the user saying invalid login. So we can use this object called viewBag, and in here I can define a variable. So I'll say dot current time equals, and I'll use the .NET datetime library to get the current date and time. So in our controller, we want to grab the current date and time. We're going to stick it in a variable called current time. And by putting this variable, attaching it to the view bag, we can then output this and format it with HTML in our about view. I'm going to save that change. So add line 35 to your controller before we return the view. We need to set that variable before the view gets loaded. And that way we can output the viewbag.currentTime value in our HTML view. So we're going to add one line of code to the about.cshtml, and it will display, whenever we load the about page, it'll display the current date and time. So each time we refresh, the time will update. I'm going to go back to about. I'll say we're using viewbag object to show that it is now. And maybe I'll put on like an H5, and I can just use the @ symbol to represent server-side code. And we can render our current time variable. So we're going to populate the variable in the controller, and we're going to display it in the view. So now it shows automatically our page reloads, and every time we refresh, we get the web server date and time. Yep, similar to kind of the handlebars, but really nice and clean syntax. Just an @ symbol to all we need. There isn't even a closing tag. So if we have multiple lines of server-side code, we just enclose them in, we just do an @ curly brace and then a closing curly brace. So the syntax is really clean, which I like. Much easier to read than PHP, where we've got opening and closing tags. We've got an echo statement to print out values. This is much simpler. Okay, I'll also show you quickly, but we'll go over it later. I'm just going to show you quickly how I could put all this stuff up on GitHub. You don't have to put your stuff on GitHub. It's integrated all into Visual Studio. So if I just do this, if I go to my Git menu, I could say, hey, create a new repository. I'm already logged into my GitHub account. I'm just going to call it Monday 1st. Make my repository public, click create and push. Done. So in my Git window, it says I've got 2 outgoing commits. Now I've got none. So it's created a new repository right here for me. So if I go back to my GitHub page, all my code that we did with 2 clicks, it's all right here, which is awesome. If you need any of the code today, it's here. So super easy to get your work up on GitHub. I didn't need to use the command line or anything else. You'll just need to authenticate with Visual Studio once if you haven't already. Okay, so all of today's code is up. The only thing you have to do for next week is go through the week 1 quiz. It's in the week 2 folder. It'll be available at 4 o'clock today until 5 o'clock on Sunday. Okay, I will get the lessons uploaded to YouTube as soon as the videos are done processing. Any questions from anybody before we break for the week? That's a good question, Megan. I don't know. I don't see any flickering. I don't know. I haven't I'll have to experiment. I haven't had that feedback in my other classes. It shouldn't. Sometimes a brief flicker. Okay, I will have to investigate and maybe try to be mindful of it. And okay, so I guess obviously it is. The other thing I will try, I'm on Wi-Fi. Last semester I was plugged in with Ethernet. Maybe I'll try not using Wi-Fi next week. We'll see if it makes a difference and remind me to check next week. Okay. I'll maybe try it where I'm plugged in directly to my router. We'll see if that makes a difference.